Welcome to the Self-Storage Canada podcast, where Deanie Burns and Jason Coonan talk high-level self-storage news, trends, economy, and education while sharing their expert experience in the Canadian market. This podcast is for owners, operators, and investors with all levels of experience as we all try to grow our businesses and leave our mark on the self-storage industry.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Self-Storage Canada. This is our first episode, and we are actually the only self-storage podcast in Canada right now. So this is exciting. I am so excited. And I have with me Jason Coonan, the CEO of Bluebird Self-Storage. So hi, Jason. How are you doing?
Doing great today, Deanie. Hope you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So how excited are you about this? I am so excited.
It's been a long time coming, so I'm glad finally giving birth to this podcast, and looking forward to having some great content to share with our audience and have some great guests, some exciting guests.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your background.
So I've been in self-storage for about 5 years. Before that, I spent 20 years in banking, and first got into self-storage with a number of sites in the Toronto market. And since 2020, we've been able to grow our property management platform to be a national operator. We're Canada's first coast-to-coast brand with stores from Vancouver Island to Halifax. We've got 25 properties across 5 provinces. That's about 2 million square feet we're managing, and we have another 2 million square feet under development. So growing quite quickly, and lots to share with our viewers regarding Canadian self-storage.
Absolutely. This is going to be so great. So as I mentioned, I'm Deanie Burns. I've been in the self-storage industry for over 7 years, worked for some vendors, some operators, traveled the world with self-storage. So it's given me quite a breadth of experience and depth of experience. I'm currently the chief of staff at Bluebird Self-Storage, and can't wait. This episode is going to be, this podcast is going to be amazing. So really looking forward to this. What a great idea. Thank you, Jason, for kicking it off and allowing us to do this. So quickly, I just wanted to mention, what are we going to be talking about? There's so much to talk about. So a couple of topics we're going to be addressing. 3 main topics actually are number 1, the industry itself. So we're going to take a 30,000 foot perspective and take a look at the industry and talk about industry news. So this is going to be far reaching. These segments that will appeal to investors, owners, people, banks, even. So we're going to be talking about some industry news, sites that are for sale, also the mood at the Toronto Real Estate Forum that Jason attended. He will be talking more about that and some of the topics that were discussed. And so that will be a great podcast. Also the economy. We're going to be talking about what is different between the Canadian economy versus the U.S. economy. And there's so much to talk about there. So that's going to be a really fun podcast. We will be addressing things like supply per capita, 3 square feet in supply versus 9 square feet in the U.S. So in Canada, there's less square footage in supply of self-storage versus the U.S. We will also be talking about emerging markets versus mature markets. So that will be another great topic, including lack of institutional capital, understanding of storage. There's only one publicly traded company listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange for storage. Also, we'll be addressing the lack of awareness by consumers in Canada versus the U.S. about self-storage. So in Canada, only about 10% of consumers use self-storage versus the U.S., where about 20% of consumers use self-storage. So there's less penetration in Canada. We will be discussing that, including trends in rents, rental activity, properties coming for sale, transactions, what's happening with investors and investments. And also we will be doing a market update. as well. So that's going to be a great podcast with Jason's background in finance and banking. He just brings a lot of insight to these analysis that you'll really appreciate. So that will be the market update and then operations. So Jason, would you like to touch upon operations and what are some topics that we will be addressing in the operational podcast?
Yeah, so there's a number of topics when it comes to operations. We're certainly going to have a range of guests talking about everything from customer service to marketing, technology, security. The list goes on. But I think our viewers will want to just learn best practices from different operators. Both some of those at Bluebird and also some other competitors. May have some folks on to compare and contrast different styles and different strategies. And I think Canadian as well as U.S. viewers will find that interesting. There's just different strategies in different markets.
Absolutely. Yeah, that'll be great. So 2024, let's talk about that.
Yeah. So, as we come to the end of another year, certainly we've been through some very different time periods. I would say, there was a pre-pandemic, time period, which was maybe more normal. And then obviously the pandemic and activity levels reaching new highs and rents reaching new highs in 2020, all the way into 2022. 2023 marked a period where things started to slow back down, maybe return to normal. And then 2024 presented a bit of a challenge with, some higher interest rates and inflation, and, consumers were really struggling both in terms of, fewer move-ins and also a higher rate of vacates because people had trouble paying for housing and food. So, Deanie, you've attended a number of conferences and kind of taken the pulse of attendees, and things have really changed throughout 2024. How would you characterize the mood as the year went on?
Yeah, great question. So I really saw like a 180-degree shift in the sentiment. So at the beginning of the year, in the spring at the Self Storage Association conference that was held in Maryland, it was very close to Washington, D.C., held at the Gaylord Hotel. I've attended an SSA conference in the past at this very same hotel. And there was such a huge differential between what I attended in the past versus this year. So this year in the spring, the mood was, for lack of a better word, I just felt it was depressed. Like I just felt this depression, this dark cloud over everyone. And so it was very telling. And then I definitely saw the mood shift going into the summer. And so at the Balboa conference, the California Self-Storage Association holds a great conference in Newport Beach every July. So there was a different, absolute differential between the spring SSA show and now the middle of the summer. And I felt hope rise. I felt the sentiment was much more positive. So I felt more optimism, more hope. And then it shifted quite dramatically coming into the fall after the presidential election. So, in the Fed cut rates, and it was absolute like 180 from the spring. And so there was a great deal of hope, a great deal of optimism, excitement, zeal. And so that's just what I've noticed are my impression. So what's your impression?
So I'm curious, back to the spring in terms of what you had seen. You expressed that the mood was pretty somber. Why do you think that was? I mean, certainly the previous 3 years were sort of a golden era for storage. I mean, were people feeling that return to normal? What was really happening? Why were they so down, do you think?
Yeah, there's a number of reasons. The rents have been falling dramatically. So there's been just a definite decrease in rents, in street rates, et cetera, very quickly. And so that's been squeezing profit margins. And it just coming into 2024, people were just, we had come off a golden age, and now with rents falling, people's profitability was being just squeezed, and so much competition, the race to the bottom. We've talked about that in other podcasts. So it just felt very, very dark.
So with rising hope, with interest rates being cut, that certainly has moved a lot of investors off the sidelines. We've seen that in Canada and the US as well. 2024 was definitely a lot better than 2023, I think, when it came to raising equity, also banks coming back and lending again to self-storage. So definitely moving in the right direction. I would express a little bit of caution just as we head into 25. Certainly people are, I would say, more optimistic, but some of those trends are still fairly weak when it comes to, occupancy, being, a little bit soft, rents are soft. So people are hoping that 25 will be a better year, and we're going to bring that to you, and we're going to update you every month on what we're seeing across our different markets. So I'm looking forward to doing that.
Yes, so am I. And I wanted to touch upon, because you made a good point in terms of interest rates. So interest rates had been very high, and people were hoping for interest rate cut. It was supposed to come last summer, and it did not. And the reason why that impacts us is because that impacts the residential market. And there's not been a lot of movement in the residential market. And when people go through a move and transition into a different home, then they typically rent self-storage to store their items. They rent trucks, they buy boxes, they rent self-storage. And because of the lack of movement and lack of transition, due to the higher interest rates, then we saw a lot less activity. And so anyways, that definitely, the interest rates definitely impact our market.
Yeah, we saw the same thing in Canada. 2024, as I just mentioned, rental activity was down a bit. So demand was down and vacates were up. People feeling the pinch of inflation and having to, let their storage unit go if it wasn't necessary. But yeah, the housing market's a huge driver, of course, of self-storage. Something like 30 or 40% of storage demand comes from people that are moving. So right. With higher interest rates and higher home prices, housing affordability is down. People decide, they're not going to move because they don't want to give up a lower price mortgage, take on a higher price mortgage, or they can't afford the payment of the new place. So that's part of the hope, I think, for next year is if mortgage rates will come down, see more housing mobility.
Absolutely. And I like the point that you made about inflation. That was an excellent point. And that's so true, that because of inflation, people are going to buy things that they absolutely need, like food. And when food prices go up and clothing prices and all these necessities that they need go up, they kind of go, do I really need to rent this unit and self-storage? And so anyways, that was a really great point. And hopefully the inflation will go down in 2025 as well. And prices will go down. So we shall see. But yeah, great point.
Well, that was one of the more surprising things I just want to add. Not as surprising to see the move-ins slow a little bit from the peak, certainly due to the housing mobility, but it was the inflation that really took a bite out of the move outs. So people were vacating at a higher rate. So that I think was the story of 2024. That was something we didn't see coming, but that put real pressure on occupancy, because even if you could, get close to maintaining similar levels of move-ins, your vacates kind of were at a record level. And we saw other operators reporting the same challenges with people moving out. So, and then I think, of course, that translates to shorter lengths of stay.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Good point. Yep. So I'm excited to kick this off and talk about all these great topics. And so this is going to be a great podcast. So thank you everyone for listening in. We want your feedback. We want your comments. We want to hear what topics you want us to cover. So please follow us on LinkedIn as well. We post on our Bluebird Self-Storage LinkedIn a lot of great industry news, great updates, acquisitions, developments, etc. So please follow us on the Bluebird Self-Storage LinkedIn. Also, if you could hit subscribe, it's free. It doesn't cost you a thing. Please hit the subscribe button. That helps us so much. So we ask that if you're enjoying this podcast, please hit subscribe, hit the like. And again, we want to hear your comments and feedback. So thank you for joining us on our first episode of Self Storage Canada. Any last words that you want to say, Jason?
No, I'm excited to get started with subsequent episodes, and just to reiterate, please follow our pages, and please share with us ideas that of topics you'd like to see us cover, and we'll be happy to cover them directly or bring on the experts if we need to help address your questions.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Signing off for now.
That concludes this episode of the Self Storage Canada podcast. Be sure to share and subscribe as we continue to tackle self-storage news, trends, economy, and education while sharing our personal experiences from the competitive world of self-storage.